Have you ever found yourself with so many options that making a decision seemed impossible? Like, imagine you go online to buy a new camera. You start scrolling through the options, and there's page after page of cameras, possibly hundreds of options. You're so excited as you open new tabs for the ones that you like, and before long, you have 50 new tabs open, each with a really cool camera. But as you go from one tab to the next, a headache starts to build, and you just can't seem to make a decision. They all seem great in their own way. Eventually, the headache wins. You go nuclear, you close all the tabs, shut the laptop, and walk away to do it another day. How did this become so difficult? Welcome. My name is Alexander. Here I review psychology and cognitive psychology research and consider how the studies and findings can impact how we think about productivity and task management. There's a pretty well-known study that looked into why decisions can start to feel overwhelming when we're presented with more and more options. Published in 2000 by Sheena Iyengar and Mark Lepper, the paper "When Choice is Demotivating, Can One Desire Too Much of a Good Thing?" asked a pretty straightforward question. Can you have too much choice? See, at the time, most psychological theory strongly suggested the answer would be no. For decades, research had shown that giving people choice increases intrinsic motivation and performance. In studies, participants worked harder and reported more interest when they were given options compared to participants who were assigned a specific task. The effects of choice were so strong that even the perception of choice often resulted in improvements. But most of those studies compared a few choices to no choice. And a few choices usually meant between 2 and 6 well-defined options. But life doesn't work like that. We frequently have more options than we know what to do with, and the differences between the options can be subtle. Very little research had tested what happens when the number gets much larger. The assumption had been if some choice is good, more choice is better. This paper set out to test that assumption. They were not saying that choice was bad, just that there might be a tipping point where additional options stopped being beneficial and started adding friction to the decision-making process. So they tested this across 3 studies. The first study was a field experiment in a grocery store. On 2 different Saturdays, a tasting booth was set up in a high-end grocery store in California, displaying either 24 varieties of exotic jam or 6. Shoppers who approached the booth could taste as many types as they wanted and received a coupon that they could use towards the purchase of that brand of jam. 2 outcomes were measured. First, how many people stopped at the booth. Second, how many people used the coupon. When 24 jams were displayed, 60% of passersby stopped to sample jams. When only 6 were displayed, only 40% stopped. So at first glance, more choice seemed more attractive. It drew people in. But here's where it gets interesting. Among those who encountered the 6 jam display, about 30% bought a jar. Among those who encountered the 24 jams, only 3% purchased. 10 times as many people who encountered the 6 jam display ended up purchasing the jam with the coupon. So the larger display attracted more attention, but the smaller display led to substantially more action. Importantly, sampling behavior didn't differ meaningfully. People in both conditions tasted roughly the same number of jams. So the overall pattern here was clear. Extensive choice increased interest, but reduced follow-through. The second study moved into an academic setting. Students in an introductory social psychology course were offered extra credit for writing a short essay. Students were told their essays would not be graded for quality. They would be receiving 2 points simply for completing the essay. Some sections were given 6 possible essay topics, others were given 30. Again, the study was trying to determine whether more options would increase motivation. Overall, 65% of students chose to write the essay. But in the 6 topic condition, 74% completed the assignment. In the 30 topic condition, only 60% completed. So, as in the JAM study, the smaller set led to higher rates of follow-through. But interestingly, there was also a performance measure. The essays were evaluated for content and form. Students who had chosen from the 6 topics wrote slightly higher quality essays than those who had chosen from the 30. This is very interesting detail. The difference between the 6 and 30 choices wasn't just in starting, it extended to how well the task was done. The third study was conducted in a lab. Participants encountered either 6 or 30 varieties of Godiva chocolates to select from. There were also a control group that had no choice and was assigned 1 chocolate to try randomly. Participants first selected 1 chocolate to try. Before tasting it, they reported how they felt about the decision-making process and how satisfied they expected to be. Then, they tasted the chocolate and reported how they felt about their selection and whether they wished they had picked something else. Finally, they were offered compensation, $5 in cash or a box of the chocolates they had selected. Several very interesting things happened. First, participants in the 30 choice condition spent significantly more time deciding. Second, they reported enjoying the decision making process more than those in the 6 choice condition. But they also reported finding it more difficult and frustrating. So it was more enjoyable and overwhelming at the same time. Before tasting, anticipated satisfaction did not differ between the two groups, nor did the confidence that they had made an informed choice as opposed to just picking something at random. But after tasting, participants who chose from 6 chocolates reported higher satisfaction with their chocolate than those who had chosen from 30. They also reported less regret. And 48% of participants in the 6 choice condition chose chocolates over cash as compensation. In the 30 choice condition, only 12% did, almost identical to the 10% of the no choice control group. So across all 3 studies, the pattern held. Larger assortments were often more attractive initially, but smaller assortments led to higher completion rates, higher satisfaction, and more decisive follow-through. The authors hypothesized that this was linked to responsibility and regret. When faced with many options, participants reported greater enjoyment of the process, but also greater difficulty and frustration. The authors suggested that with more options comes greater perceived responsibility for the outcome. If you had 30 possibilities and you picked one, it becomes harder to feel confident you didn't miss something better. This increased sense of responsibility may heighten regret and reduce satisfaction afterwards. So the mechanism isn't simply cognitive overload. It may also involve anticipating and experienced regret of making the wrong choice. I found this study fascinating. I can think of so many times in my life when I was impacted by choice overload, where the fear of making the wrong choice paralyzed me. Buying the microphone I'm using right now must have taken me 3 weeks. I'd done my research, made a short list of mics I was considering, and yet it still took me 2 more weeks to actually bite the bullet as I kept coming back and double checking that I really did want to go with this one, not the competitors. I can certainly think of many times when my task list was so extensive that it was overwhelming, and I ended up picking something at just about random instead of making an intelligent choice. There were just too many options, and the entire time I was nervous that I was missing something, that my task list had failed in making sure I was able to see the most important tasks that needed my attention. Look at your task backlog right now, or if you don't have a list or your list is incomplete, imagine all the open tasks that are waiting for you. Now think about which one you need to do right now. That hesitation, that friction, is the impact of choice overload, the effort of cross-evaluating multiple acceptable options, the awareness that choosing one means not choosing the others. While on its own, this friction may not seem like much, it is worth considering that it is happening throughout the day. Every time you finish one task and move on to another, you're faced with this. I think it'll be interesting to also look into studies on decision fatigue and consider how these may compound each other. The shift in quality seen in the extra credit study is also worth keeping in mind as well. The students with fewer options, fewer tasks to pick from, perform the tasks that they chose better than the students who had more options. Does this lack of clarity created by our task lists prevent us from really being in the moment and really committing to the task at hand? Too many options can also appear inside a single poorly defined task, since the more defined a task is, the fewer options you have regarding how to accomplish it. The study doesn't claim that fewer options are always better. In preference matching contexts, more options can increase the chance of finding exactly what you want, and the authors are careful to avoid universal claims. But the consistent shift across these experiments is worth noticing. More options reduced commitment and follow-through. So if we go back to the productivity example, the question becomes less about willpower and more about structure. Is your challenge getting started a matter of willpower and energy, or are you giving yourself too many options? That's something to think about. If this was helpful, consider subscribing. Thank you for watching.